When I first started this channel, I thought that people really wanted to see difficult solo challenges, so I decided to play Pokemon Yellow because I knew, or at least I thought I knew, that that game was much more difficult when compared with Pokemon Red and Blue. Throughout the years, it's been almost half a decade now, I have learned that this is normally the case, although not in all circumstances. Today I'm going to continue indulging in this obsession comparing Yellow with Red and Blue to see which one is more difficult. Today we're going to see which game Machamp beats more easily. These are the rules for the solo challenge. You can also find them in the description later in case you want to reference them. Machamp is quite good in a solo format for a lot of reasons. Number one, it has a medium slow growth rate, which is by far the best in Generation 1. Its stats are pretty good: 90 HP, 130 attack, and 80 defense. From there it goes downhill. 55 speed, giving it a 10.55% chance to crit, and 65 special. Honestly, this last stat is pretty good for defensive purposes alongside Machamp's high HP. It's also got a decent defense stat, so in general, it doesn't take that much damage. It's not a frail fighting type, unlike a Pokemon like Hitmonlee, which for a while I have been assuming is the best fighting type in Generation 1 solo challenges. But I think Machamp is going to give it a run for its money. Unlike some Pokemon, which have different move pools between Red and Yellow, I'm thinking about you, Alakazam, Machamp's is unchanged. It starts with Karate Chop, Low Kick, and Leer, then through Level Up gets a bunch of useless stuff: Focus Energy, Seismic Toss, and Submission. Through TM and HM, it can learn all the generic normal type moves: Mega Punch, Mega Kick, Body Slam, Takedown, Double Edge, and Hyper Beam. It can learn all 3 fighting type moves, Submission being one of them. If you don't know me, this is one of my least favorite moves in the game. Base 80 power with 80% accuracy and recoil damage feels like it makes this move almost unusable. However, I am going to be using it today, which pains me to say. Machamp can also learn all 3 ground type moves, which is a major departure from Hitmonlee's set. It does not have anything to knock out Agatha's ghosts other than Bide, Seismic Toss, and Mimic. Machamp, on the other hand, is set up to potentially one-shot all of Agatha's team members. It also learns Fire Blast. I have no idea why, but that's pretty cool, and it gets Rock Slide for coverage against flying-type Pokemon. The early game is actually different between Pokemon Yellow and Red in a few different ways. Number 1, the rival has a Charmander, a Bulbasaur, or a Squirtle. I'm going up against the Fire-type starter here because it later turns into a Flying-type, even though it doesn't get any Flying-type moves. I always base which Pokemon I go up against on type effectiveness alone. If I can do that, I only consider the moves those Pokemon have once I've exhausted type combinations. In this case, even the Charmander takes 2 hits to knock out in the lab, which is different than Yellow version. In that game, he has an Eevee. Of course, Low Kick is super effective, and I can easily one-shot his singular Pokemon, meaning this battle is slightly faster. However, I'm going to freeze frame on the frame just outside of the lab and then compare the 2 times from these screenshots. You'll notice that Pokemon Red is slightly faster leaving Professor Oak's lab. So how is that possible if the rival battle took less turns? Well, it's really simple. In Pokemon Yellow, you have all of this additional text. After the rival leaves the lab, then Professor Oak has to tell you a few things about your Pikachu. Additionally, in Yellow version, when you're heading north after returning Professor Oak's parcel, the guy who gives you the catching tutorial will stop you and then fail to catch a Rattata. This is Pokemon Yellow exclusive, because in Red version, you can simply just walk right by this guy. The differences continue. For both of these games, I'm going to be fighting Brock on minimum battles. At the end of the forest, there is one mandatory bug catcher, and his team changes between the games. In Red version, he only has a Weedle. This Pokemon has a lower experience yield. Because of that, Machamp is only level 7 by the time it leaves the forest, whereas in Yellow version, he has a Caterpie, and it's also 1 level higher, so it gives a better amount of experience. Plus, Machamp started this fight with more experience because the Eevee in the lab also has better experience yields. All of this levels Machamp up to 8 before I take on Brock. It's easy to complain about Game Freak making everything more difficult for the player when they start with Pikachu in Pokemon Yellow, but that isn't really true. They did make Brock's Pokemon 2 levels lower. His Geodude is level 10 and his Onix is level 12. With the extra experience from the bug catcher in the forest, Machamp is a higher level, making Brock's Pokemon easy to manage. There's also another quirk here, which is his Onix knows the move Bind in addition to his other 3 moves. This means that because Brock has no AI script, it is less likely for him to choose choose the move Bide, which is actually in Machamp's favor. This means I can just spam low kick, go for the upside of potential critical hits, which I do get in this case, and then I knock out the Onix in only 2 turns, speeding up the overall length of the battle. In red version, Machamp has a little bit of a disadvantage, because against the Onix, it only has 3 moves, so it's much more likely to use Bide. It's of course faster than Machamp, so it would go first with this move, and then I would attack into it with low kick. Because of the discrepancy between levels, his Onix is going to take less damage, and I will have to 3-shot, meaning it's quite likely that Onix will unleash and knock out Machamp in 1 hit. I played these red version runs on stream in case you want to check them out, and at first I figured there was no way to play around this, but there is. It just takes a little bit of time. I can use Leer to lower the Onix's defense, then after 3 of these, I'm going to be guaranteed to get a 2-shot, and Bide can no longer knock Machamp out. In the end, both of these splits are pretty fast. In yellow version, Machamp gets a time of 2 minutes and 15 seconds, whereas in red, it gets a time of 2 minutes and 6 seconds. 9 seconds ahead. Time to talk about stopping by the Mart. In these solo challenges, in yellow version, for so long I have stopped by the Viridian City Mart in order to buy Pokeballs. But recently there has been a seismic shift in what we're doing in terms of marting, because we did a Mew race behind the scenes. If you didn't know, that video is going to be coming out in a couple of months, maybe even longer. It's going to take me a while to edit since we had so many competitors. During that race, which was extremely competitive, we learned a lot of things. And one of those things is that in yellow version, catching Pidgey in Viridian Forest is not always the most efficient thing to do, and you typically don't need potions throughout the Viridian Forest section of the game, so I have skipped my early Mart trip. That is one of the reasons I was able to get my Brock split so low with Machamp. My intention is to catch Doduo in Celadon City, so I'm going to skip the Pewter Mart entirely. Whereas in Pokemon Red, I'm going to go to the Pewter Mart right away because I need to pick up Pokeballs here. The reason for this is in yellow version, a lot of your HM users are just given to you by NPCs. Charmander and Squirtle, for example. Charmander is a cut user, which can also use Dig as a field move. In red version though, I have to choose which HM users I'm going to catch from the overworld, and I think Paris is the best inside of Mount Moon. There's also an option for Geodude here, which can use Dig and Strength, but then you still need to catch a cut user like Bellsprout or Oddish north of Vermilion City. Catching just one HM user is of course faster than catching 2, so I pick up Paris, and then I skip Mega Punch inside of Mount Moon. You might think this move would make sense to pick up since Karate Chop only has a base power of 50, and it is a normal type move in Generation 1, but that's not really the case. Karate Chop has a high critical hit ratio. Machamp's base speed isn't enough to give it crits every single turn with this move, but I'm still going to be getting them roughly 86% of the time. At the end of Mount Moon, there are major differences between these two games. In Pokemon Red, you have to fight this Rocket who only has 2 Pokemon, a Rattata and a Zubat. The Zubat would be really annoying if Karate Chop was a fighting type move, but since I have normal type damage, this team is very easy to manage. After that, there is the Super Nerd prior to the fossils, and then that's it. I get to leave the cave and head into Cerulean City. In yellow version, the mandatory Rocket from red version has actually been repositioned to right here, so he doesn't exist at the end of the cave, but I have to fight the fossil Super Nerd and then battle Jesse and James, who has a team of 3 Pokemon. For Machamp, this definitely slows it down a little bit. I don't knock out the Ekans in 1 hit, I can knock out the Meowth in 1 hit, but then the Coughing also takes 2 hits to take down, so it's a relatively slow battle. That said, even with all of these differences, if we synchronize the footage to real time, both of these playthroughs are going into the rival battle on Nugget Bridge around the same time. Let's focus on yellow version. The rivals team is Spearow, Sandshrew, Rattata, and Eevee. That's 3 normal types and 1 ground type. The Sandshrew can be very annoying with Sand Attack, but it's second on his team, which is actually a small advantage. You might be worried about the Spearow constantly going for Peck, but the rival does not have good AI during this battle, so he's just going to be randomly selecting moves. And if he uses Growl to lower my attack, it won't matter that much if I'm constantly critting with Karate Chop. So his first 2 Pokemon have potentials to be annoying, but overall this fight's really straightforward. Once I make it to the Rattata, I level up to 18 so I'm faster than it, and then Low Kick can just one-shot his final 2 Pokemon. This gives me a rival 2 split of 5 minutes and 4 seconds. Whereas in Pokemon Red, his team is Pidgeotto, Abra, Rattata, and Charmander. There's only 2 normal types here, and the Pidgeotto is very pudgy, it's also very bulky, and it's the first Pokemon on his team which also knows Sand Attack and only has 3 3 moves. So even though it's randomizing its move selection, the likelihood for it to lower my accuracy is much higher. This has the potential to slow down the rest of the fight, or even cause a loss in the worst case scenario. Also, Abra, which is next, could be annoying. Well, it would be if Karate Chop was a fighting type move again. Machamp is one scenario where having this as a normal type move is actually a benefit for a fighting type. Most other fighting types cannot say the same thing. Rattata is the one and only Pokemon that takes super effective damage from low kick, and then Charmander I have to 2-shot. So this ends up being a slower battle in Pokemon Red. I get a split of 5 minutes and 10 seconds. The lead that Red version had from Brock has completely evaporated. Now it's 6 seconds behind Yellow version. But the back and forth in this tug of war is going to continue. Just after beating all the trainers on Route 24, which I call Nugget Bridge, I'm going to pick up Charmander in Yellow version, which wastes some frames to text scrolling. In both of the runs, I choose to fight this hiker for a little bit of additional experience, which will be relevant as we progress through this run. After all, Machamp has no setup moves, so it's going to have to rely on raw bulk and strength to get through all of the remainder of the playthrough. It doesn't have the advantage of setting up badge boosts even. It could access them through Double Team, but that's banned in my format. Okay, so watch this closely. At the end of Route 25, I go into Bill's house, I talk to him. Then in Yellow version, the player character is actually automatically navigated back over to him to get the SS ticket. However, after this, I have to leave his house and walk all the way back to Cerulean City. Now, many of you in the past have left in my comments telling me that I should use an escape rope to get out of this location, but that is not actually possible in Yellow version. Whereas in Red version, after I talk to Bill, I am not magnetically taken back over to talk to him, so I have to navigate back here. However, I can use the escape rope that I picked up in Mount Moon to quickly escape this location and head back to Cerulean City, saving some time. Between the two games, Misty has subtle differences, which I don't think you will have noticed if you haven't played these games extensively in this format. Staryu has Tackle and Water Gun, Starmie has Tackle, Water Gun, and Bubble Beam, but it lacks Harden, which was added to it in Pokemon Yellow. Her AI script is Good AI, which is the same between both games, so the only difference here is that one additional move. But I think it makes her slightly easier in Pokemon Yellow, because if the Starmie spams Harden, then I'm just going to bypass her stat changes when I'm using Karate Chop and getting critical hits. With these, Machamp can 2-shot her ace, and in Red version, it clocks in with a split of 7 minutes and 57 seconds. Whereas in Yellow version, when I fail to get a critical hit, I bleed a little bit of time 3-shotting the Starmie, but largely the slower split here, which is 8 minutes and 7 seconds, is due to the longer walk time back from Bill's house. Still, these two runs are incredibly close together, only 10 seconds separate them right now. I'm just going to take a brief moment here to mention that these are my final playthroughs with Machamp from both games. I tried multiple times with each. You can see all of my Machamp playthroughs on my stream VOD or the Supercuts channel if you want a more concise version of the stream. I didn't stream any of the runs in Yellow version, but this is my 5th attempt with Machamp, and that will be relevant for later because I only did 2 playthroughs with Machamp in Red version, although I completed both of them after doing all of my research and playthroughs in Pokemon Yellow. I try to make these videos as fair as possible, but I do have to choose which Pokemon I'm going to play first, that sort of thing. Also, I am playing both of these runs in different formats. In Yellow version, I'm able to do as many playthroughs as I want, and in Pokemon Red, I'm only allowed to do 2 playthroughs. So there is some discrepancy there, but I still think by the end of the video, you're going to get a really good sense as to how Machamp does in both of these games. And we're also going to get a really good comparison of the difficulties in each game. The next section of the game is largely identical between the 2 playthroughs. I have to fight this guy who has Machop and Drowsy. This is the first Psychic-type Pokemon that has Psychic-type damage that is mandatory to fight in a playthrough. Luckily, Karate Chop deals enough damage to knock it out in a single hit. After that, I have to take on Sandy and her 3 sand-attacking Pidgeys. Machamp is faster than them, so they're not a threat. On the SS Anne, I'm going to do the same things in both playthroughs. Pick up the TM for Rest, grab the TM for Body Slam, then teach Body Slam and Dig, which I picked up from the Rocket earlier in the playthrough, and then I face the rival. This is the first fight where he has good AI. If you've been looking at the splits on the right-hand side of the screen, wondering why the rival's image is different depending on the fight that I'm doing against him, the reason is I have changed the picture every time his AI script changes. In Red version, though, that only has one consequence. sequence. The Kadabra is always going to use Confusion or Teleport against Machamp. It's never going to choose Disable. Here's the thing though, I planned this route very specifically to ensure that I would outspeed the Kadabra. Machamp levels up after knocking out Raticate, breaking the speed tie against the Psychic type, allowing me to one-shot with Body Slam, avoiding Confusion entirely. Remember that hiker with 3 Geodudes and 1 Machop that I fought earlier on Route 25? He is the person that gives me enough experience to pull this off. If I had instead fought the junior trainer with only 2 Pokemon, then I would have been speed tied with Kadabra and at risk of getting hit by a critical hit Confusion, or potentially confused and then Machamp could knock itself out. In Yellow version, this fight is theoretically easier than it is in Red and Blue because there's no Kadabra. His team is Spearow, Rattata, Sandshrew, and Eevee, all Pokemon which are really easy for Machamp to manage at this point in the run. The fact of the matter is though, that these 2 fights take a relatively similar amount of time. The fight was 14.5 seconds in Red version and 14 seconds in Yellow. You'll notice that there's a little bit of a discrepancy between the splits at this point. Yellow version has fallen further behind. It's now 19 seconds behind Red version, but that's going to be cancelled out by the next gym leader because Lieutenant Surge is coming up. And in Yellow, he only has 1 Pokemon, a single Raichu, which obviously gets 1 hit by Machamp's Dig. I easily survive its Thunderbolt and then knock it out, clocking in with a Surge split of 11 minutes and 9 seconds. In Red version, this fight takes much longer because he has 3 Pokemon. He also has good AI, but that isn't relevant today. His Pokemon will be randomizing their moves because all of them are considered neutrally effective against Machamp. Also, for speed, I'm using Body Slam here against the Voltorb and the Pikachu, and then I use Dig to one-shot the Raichu. Dig is faster than two-shotting with a move like Body Slam or Karate Chop, just because the second turn is slightly faster because it doesn't print as much text. So the lead that Yellow version was making is mostly just erased here. In Red version, I get a Surge split of 11 minutes and 1 second. That's 8 seconds faster than Yellow. Still, a really close match between these two despite all of the tiny differences. But we have reached a major inflection point in this run, because moving into the mid-game, things are very different in Yellow version. For some reason, the developers felt that it was okay to buff the levels of Koga, Sabrina, and Blaine. And I will be talking about these 3 trainers because they're all quite challenging. Whereas in Red version, they're not really that difficult, but I have to talk about them later because for now we need to go through Rock Tunnel. And inside of here, there are some Slowpoke, which are always annoying. They take a long time to knock out because they're decently bulky, but they also have Psychic type moves. Unlike the Drowsy earlier on the Rockets team, this Slowpoke cannot be knocked out in 1 hit, so I will take damage from Confusion. This gets really scary if Machamp becomes confused, which does happen for me in Yellow version. I get taken down to 24 hit points. Luckily, Machamp doesn't hit itself for a second time, and I'm able to pull through against the Pokemaniacs. Outside of that, everything else in Rock Tunnel is really simple. The self-destructing hiker doesn't cause any problems. I can use either Dig or Low Kick here. Low Kick is slightly faster because it'll one-shot all of his Pokemon, but if I miss, I could be hit by a self-destruct. So it's slightly risky and has the potential to bleed sometime. Whereas Dig is much safer, since he can self-destruct while you're underground. In the end, I'm going for the Low Kick strategy though, because I'm trying to conserve as much time as possible. Okay, let's synchronize the footage again. As Pokemon Red is making it into Celadon City, you can see that Yellow version is quite far behind. The confusion inside of Rock Tunnel, as well as a few other small factors, have pushed Yellow version into more of a time deficit. And this is just going to increase, because in Pokemon Yellow, I need to collect all of the rare candies that I physically can. I'm also going to pick up this PP up in Celadon City, battle this optional trainer to get access to the Rocket Hideout, where I can find another PP up, and then collect 1 additional rare candy. In Pokemon Red, I have skipped all of this. As Yellow version is digging out of the Rocket Hideout, Red version is starting to go up against the rival in Pokemon Tower. Just to catch a few things up here, because I did skip some details, I bought 2 Carbos and used them on Machamp to increase its speed stat, and I also picked up the Rock Slide TM, which I have taught to Machamp for coverage against Flying-type Pokemon. And my Orange Cat Churro wants to say hi to everyone. He's being very noisy this morning while I'm recording this Machamp voiceover. Anyway, back to the rival. I can 1-hit the Pidgeotto using Rock Slide. I have to 2-hit the Execute, which can bleed a lot of time because it can use Hypnosis to put Machamp to sleep. Luckily, I wake up quickly and knock it out in only 2 turns. Gyarados goes down to a single Rock Slide. I outspeed and 1-hit the Kadabra with Body Slam, and Dig can 1-hit the final Charmeleon. Overall, an easy battle for Machamp. In Yellow version, this fight isn't really more difficult. His Pokemon are actually worse here. He has Fearow, Magnemite, Shelder, Sandshrew, and Eevee. Less fully evolved developed Pokemon. However, I was able to knock out the Gyarados in one hit, but I'm not able to do the same against the Shelder. It just barely survives a single hit and I have to knock it out over 2 turns, bleeding a small amount of time. However, all of the additional bloat because of the Rocket Hideout leaves Machamp in yellow 1 minute and 22 seconds behind red version after this rival battle. But yellow is going to be able to scrape back a little bit of this time in Pokemon Tower. The Ghastly are all outsped and one-shot with Dig or Rock Slide if you want to save time, but I'm playing a little bit safely here because getting hit by Confuse Ray and paralyzed by Lick can sometimes cause resets, and those are very costly. At the top of Pokemon Tower, I have to take on Jesse and James. This is a single battle with 3 Pokemon, Meowth, Arbok, and Weezing, but Machamp has really good moves against all of them. It can one-shot even the Weezing when using Dig. Slowing Red down are 3 Rocket Trainers. The first one has 3 Pokemon, the second one has 2, one is a Drowsy, luckily I can one-shot it, and the third one has 4 Pokemon. Whenever I compare these two games, I really do think this is the spot where red version runs much slower than yellow, because from here, red kind of gets unleashed. It's time for the mid-game. Immediately after Pokemon Tower, I hightail my way to Silph. This is so I can go to the 10th floor, fight a single Rocket who has Machoke, and then I can collect myself a rare candy as well as the TM for Earthquake. I'm going to teach this move to Machamp right away in the place of Dig, because I purchased escape ropes so I can continue using a similar effect as Dig in the overworld to save time. But I can also save frames in battle now using Earthquake, and that's relevant because over the next section of the game, I'm going to be doing some optional battles. On Cycling Road, I fight this biker who I call Double Weezing, and then the biker boss at the end of the route for maximum experience. These are the last 2 optional battles that Red Machamp is going to complete. Upon arriving in Fuchsia City, I'm going to go straight to the gym. I can easily finish off the jugglers here. There are 2 of them that are mandatory, but Machamp has the physical attack to knock out all their psychic types in single hits. The only exception is the Kadabra, which is faster. However, it's not able to knock me out. After that, I go up against Koga. Alright, he is really bad in Pokemon Red. Look at his team. Coughing, Muck, Coughing, and Weezing. Their levels are 37, 39, 37, and 43. Machamp isn't able to one-hit the Muck, but I can 2-shot using Rock Slide. I'm out of Body Slam PP, so that's why. Also, I'm going to be out of Earthquake PP by the end of the battle. I use it one final time against Weezing. It doesn't knock out, but then I use Rock Slide to clean up. This is where the splits on the right-hand side of the screen are going to become kind of random, because I'm doing things out of order, so I have to present them in some kind of ordered list. In this case, Koga is done before Erica and Rival 5. But yellow version has to do a completely different order for this section of the game, because Koga has a Venomoth that is level 50 and knows the move Psychic. This is one of the most annoying Pokemon to work around when using a fighting type in yellow version. It has a speed stat of 103, so if I wanted to move first against it to hit with Rock Slide, I would need 104 speed. And as you can see, my yellow Machamp is nowhere near that. I'm gonna have to move second against Koga's Venomoth. And because of that, I'll have to survive a single Psychic to one-shot the Venomoth, or 2 Psychics to 2-shot the Venomoth. This is where yellow version is gonna really slow down. I have to battle a bunch of optional trainers in Silph. In all my testing with Machamp in yellow version, it didn't make sense to fight Koga at a level lower than 50. Here are the damage ranges to prove that. Earthquake's gonna be able to one-shot both of the first 2 Venonats, then I have to use Rock Slide for the third one and for the Venomoth. Of course, I underspeed the Venomoth. Here, Rock Slide at level 50 does 104 to 123% damage, so it's just barely doing enough with its minimum damage roll to one-shot, whereas Venomoth does between 42 and 50% damage with Psychic from a regular hit. If it gets a crit, it does 79 to 93% damage. Just to drive my point home, I have eliminated some of the optional trainers from this route so that you can see how Machamp would fare against Koga at level 42. Rock Slide is going to 2-hit 82.9% of the time, and Venomoth's Psychic does between 57 and 68% damage. So what is most likely going to happen here is you'll just hit one Rock Slide and then Venomoth will 2-shot you using Psychic. In Silph, I battle a lot of optional trainers until Machamp gets to level 37 and picks up the card key. Then I head down Cycling Road, but unlike Red version, I'm going to battle 4 trainers here instead of only 2. Upon arriving in Fuchsia City, it doesn't make any sense for Machamp to take on Koga. It's not a high enough level yet, so I'm heading through the Safari Zone to grab Surf first, and then I dig back to Celadon Saffron City. This is convenient because now I can go and fight Erica. Her team's really simple for Machamp. She has a Tangela, a Weepinbell, and a Gloom. Overall, I have to two-shot the Tangela and one-shot both the Weepinbell and the Gloom using Earthquake. One of the advantages to fighting Erica early on in a playthrough after the Safari Zone, like I've done here, is that when you beat Koga, you will be able to pick up the Strength Rare Candy inside the Warden's house, which I won't be able to pick up nearly as easily in Pokemon Red. That is a tiny silver lining on the awfulness that is the yellow mid-game. Now I'm flying back to Silph, and to save time, making it to the rival, I'm gonna go buy the Hypno Sandwich, fighting him, as well as this scientist to level Machamp up to 42. Here, I want to make a huge shout out to Zealous Pawn, who helped me optimize this Machamp playthrough in Pokemon Yellow. Thank you so much. It was his idea here to use 5 rare candies to boost Machamp to level 47 before taking on the rival. And while I'm doing that, you might notice my moveset. I have taught Machamp Submission in the place of Low Kick. Zealous Pawn and I did discuss this choice because Low Kick has some utility in the late game, which I'll talk about later. However, Submission is really helpful here against the rival. Here are my damage ranges against all of his Pokemon. The Sandslash is going to be a 2-hit, but the Cloyster can be a 1-hit using the powerful fighting type move. This does save time, and it's going to prevent the Cloyster from using Aurora Beam and dropping my attack, which can be devastating for the remainder of the fight. Also, Clamp and Supersonic are both just really annoying moves. It's nice to be able to avoid them. Once the Cloyster goes down, it's a one-shot on the Magneton, the Kadabra, and the Flareon. So let's see how this battle goes in practice. Well, Sandslash comes out, and since I have to two-shot, it's able to use Sand Attack on turn 1, lowering my accuracy. Then I miss a bunch of Earthquakes, take some damage, and Cloyster comes in. I'm using Submission now with my accuracy lowered, so this move only has a 52% chance to hit. Cloyster's missing, but then it goes for Aurora Beam, drops my attack, uses Clamp, and I just decided to reset here. That is the first fault of this entire video, and it's in yellow version against the rival in Silph. When I was playing these runs, this was the first moment that I really thought that Machamp had a chance to lose. I was going to accept 1 reset against this rival, but 2 was unacceptable. I would have simply restarted the run if I got that unlucky. In the next battle, I still get hit with Sand Attack. Luckily, Earthquake comes through, knocking out the Sandslash, Submission hits the Cloyster, one-shotting, and I don't miss on the Magneton or the Kadabra. But I do against the Flareon. Luckily, it just misses its own Fire Spin, and then I knock it out. Okay, we need to go back and catch up with Red version, because while it feels like it's behind at this point, it really isn't. I'm going to Erica after Koga. I can completely destroy her team at this level, and then I go to Silph. Here, I just go straight to the rival because his team is not nearly as scary. He leads with Pidgeot. I can one-shot it with Rock Slide, so it has no chance to use Sand Attack like the Sandslash. Then Execute comes in, and it's only ever going to choose Reflect. It's only Psychic type move. So it is trivial for Machamp to knock out as well. Gyarados goes down in a single hit. Alakazam follows that. Now, this Pokemon has the potential to cause problems. It has Confusion and Psybeam, which it's going to alternate between. If it confuses Machamp, then there's the potential for a reset here, but as long as I get 1 hit off, Earthquake will one-shot. After that is Charizard, and of course, Rock Slide takes care of it. Overall, Rival 5 is so much easier in Pokemon Red when you're playing with Machamp. After him, I'm going to pick up Lapras, who's going to be my Surf user for the remainder of the playthrough. I crush Giovanni. After him, I get to play very efficiently, because in Red version, Machamp doesn't need to leave Saffron City. It can stay here and fight Sabrina right away. Her team consists of Kadabra, Mr. Mime, Venomoth, and Alakazam. Their levels are 38, 37, 38, and 43. Machamp is faster than everything except the Alakazam, and I can one-shot the Kadabra, the Mr. Mime, and the Venomoth. So Sabrina's only Pokemon that can attack is her Alakazam. And its best move here is Psybeam, which it does choose against me. However, Machamp shrugs it off, uses Earthquake, and one-shots her ace. Switching back to Yellow version, this is not going to be the case. I can't stay in Saffron City. But after defeating Giovanni, my Machamp is level 49, so I'm very close to the level threshold I need to face Koga. I'm going to have to fly away from Saffron City and head to Fuchsia City next, and I even have to do a little bit more additional training. I fight this tamer inside of Koga's gym, and then after the mandatory juggler, I've reached level 50 to take on the Poison Bug Psychic Specialist. He really does feel like a Psychic type user in Pokemon Yellow. We've already gone through these damage ranges, so you know what's going to happen. Earthquake one-shots the first 2 Venonats, then Rock Slide takes care of the 3rd Venonat, and I'm able to survive the Venomoth's hit, and then use Rock Slide, knocking it out in a single turn. Nice. Yellow continues training from here. As I head south towards Cinnabar Island, I fight Psyche the Fisher. He has 3 Seeking, and they're very experience rich, and I need to continue leveling up to make the late game as simple as possible for Machamp. Next, I head through Blaine's gym. Now, Machamp is very lucky here that it has access to Earthquake, because Blaine could otherwise be a little bit scary. Still, in Yellow version, there is the potential that you lose here, so I am going to save before him. His first Pokemon is Ninetales. I am underspeeding all 3 of his Pokemon so they will all be able to attack. The worst move Ninetales can go for is Confuse Ray, which messes up the remainder of the battle. Tail Whip can be a little bit annoying, but overall it badge boosts me, which is actually a benefit, because then Machamp just barely outspeeds all 3 of Blaine's Pokemon. Still though, you can see why this fight is sketchy. I do some damage to myself in confusion, Rapidash comes out using Fire Spin, and Machamp goes down to orange health before I knock out Blaine's 2nd Pokemon. I've also had my defense dropped, so Arcanine could potentially knock me out with Takedown, after it survives Earthquake on a sliver of health. This Arcanine is level 54. Let that sink in for a second. Luckily for me, it just goes for a Reflect. This is purely chance because in Yellow version, Blaine does not have good AI. So I was able to luck through that battle with a win. In Red version, after finishing Sabrina, I go to Blaine's gym. But check out his team: Growlithe, Ponyta, Rapidash, and Arcanine. The Arcanine is level 47. His whole team is so much worse in this game. I also should mention that his Pokemon don't have moves like Confuse Ray or Flamethrower. The best move he could hit me with is Fire Blast, but the Arcanine is not going to survive a hit from my Machamp's Earthquake, so yeah. He could also use Super Potions when his Pokemon are at full health. In this case though, he just missed a Fire Blast, so overall, a really simple battle for Machamp in Pokemon Red, and the easy battles are just going to continue. Giovanni is next. His team is so incompetent in Pokemon Red. He has a Rhyhorn, a Dugtrio, a Nidoqueen, a Nidoking, and a Rhydon. All good Pokemon. That said, their movesets are terrible, so I can sweep through this fight even if it takes multiple turns to knock out his Pokemon. We're just going to continue with Red for a second because next I have to take on the rival on Route 22. I'm doing this at level 48, a lower level than Yellow Machamp needed to beat Koga. Before this fight, I teach Mimic in the place of Low Kick. I have also not had to resort to Submission, which is a blessing. This rival fight is a little bit tricky. Notice that I'm about to level up, which means all of my badge boosts will be reset. I'm going to mimic Agility from the Pidgeot so that I can set up for the remainder of the battle. I want to ensure that Machamp is outspeeding the Alakazam and the Charizard at the end of the fight, which are currently faster. Upon stealing this move, I knock the Pidgeot out as quickly as I can, because Rhyhorn is next. This Pokemon is incompetent. Stomp, Tail Whip, Fury Attack, and Horn Drill are its moves. I can take my time here, setting up with Agility, badge boosting my attack stat, as well as my speed stat, and I leveled up right before this, so I'm not going to lose my badge boosts for the remainder of the battle. Then I can just sweep my way through the rival's remaining Pokemon. If you were thinking it would be more difficult for Machamp to go up against the Blastoise team or the Venusaur team, that's not really the case for this fight because the setup at the beginning is always going to be the same. He's always leading with Pidgeot and he always has Rhyhorn second. In Red version, prior to the Elite Four, I am not going to battle any additional trainers. We go right through Victory Road as fast as is possible. Then, prior to Lorelei, I am going to use 7 rare candies to boost Machamp all the way up to level 57. Okay, Red version is ready for the Elite Four, but we really need to catch up with Pokemon Yellow. I'm fighting Sabrina after Blaine, because Machamp has 106 speed, meaning it just barely moves first against her Abra and it can avoid getting hit by Flash on turn 1. But the Kadabra and the Alakazam are both at level 50. That is 7 levels higher than Sabrina's Ace Alakazam in Pokemon Red. Also, her Alakazam in Pokemon Yellow has Psychic, which is a big upgrade over Psybeam. However, she doesn't have good AI anymore, so she could use Recover on turn 1, which is exactly what happens, allowing Machamp to easily one-shot her Ace. This fight is basically just random. She could beat Machamp at any point, but you also have a pretty good chance of taking out the Alakazam. After all, she also has Psywave, which in general is just a terrible move. Okay, Giovanni in yellow. This team is so good. He is probably the trainer that has improved the most between red and blue and yellow, and this is by far his best incarnation in the entire series, at least I think it is. 4 of his Pokemon have ground type moves. Look at his Nido's movesets: Earthquake, Tail Whip or Leer, Thunder, and Double Kick. I get hit by Screech from the Persian, so all physical moves will deal increased damage. Luckily for me, my Machamp is able to one-shot both the Nidoqueen and the Nidoking, but not the Rhydon. It's going to take 2 turns to knock out. Sometimes he'll go for a guard spec, but this time he doesn't. He chooses Earthquake, a same type attack bonus move, which is going to do massive damage to Machamp, which was hit by Screech. In my mind, this was a loss. I almost reset, but then Machamp pulls through with 2 hit points, is able to attack the Rhydon again and knock it out. By the way, if you're wondering why I didn't use Submission against the Rhydon, here are the damage ranges. So Submission has a slightly higher 0.3% chance of one-hitting the Rhydon, but it has a significantly lower percent chance to 2-shot. Also, Submission has recoil damage, and if I had used it on turn 1, I would have lost against Giovanni. So I am so glad that I had planned out all of these damage ranges, and I knew that I should be using Earthquake here. By the way, even with 1 badge boost, Submission is still not able to one-shot the Rhydon, so Earthquake is always the correct choice. With this battle complete, the splits have finally lined up again. Yellow version is 4 minutes and 23 seconds behind red. The rival on Route 22 is a very interesting battle when compared between these two games. For some Pokemon, I think it's significantly harder in red and blue. I think overall that is the harder fight against the rival, but in this case with Machamp, it's not really the case. It's easy in both games. However, in yellow, there's no badge boosting moves to mimic. I just have to brute force my way through this fight. But that's actually really easy to do because he doesn't have an Alakazam, so I'm faster than the Kadabra. This is one reason I've been using Carbos throughout this playthrough, because the speed stats here are very close. Kadabra has 118 and Machamp has 120. So overall, yellow version is able to gain a small time advantage from this fight, but it's still really behind, 4 minutes and 9 seconds. And so with yellow version, I head into Victory Road. We're gonna switch over to red version now, but before we cut away from yellow, just look up at the clock. That playthrough is roughly at 35 minutes when it's making its way through the final dungeon. Now, back over to red and the final trainers of the game. Lorelei is first. This is a really simple fight in red version. Her Slowbro is terrible. She has good AI, so the Slowbro is only ever going to use Amnesia against fighting type Pokemon. This allows me to mimic it for free, set up so that Jinx and Lapras do very little damage to Machamp. And this also badge boosts my attack, giving me better damage against both of them. Then there's this guy. Please look at his movesets. They are such trash. Because I've done less training in red version, my Machamp is at a lower level, meaning it takes multiple turns to knock out his ace here. The Machamp takes 3 turns to knock out, which is pretty wild. Although, it just uses Fissure twice, which has no effect on Pokemon which are faster than the user. So yeah, a free win. And Agatha is going to be equally as free. While she does have Gengar, which is fast and it's basically a psychic type, it would have to use Hypnosis first and then Dream Eater in order to inflict good damage against Machamp. And she does not have good AI, even in red version. So Machamp just quickly sweeps through her team using a combination of Earthquake and Rock Slide, which by the way have neutral coverage against every Pokemon in the game. Alright, Lance. Only 2 of his Pokemon can actually deal damage to Machamp. The first is Gyarados. It can use Dragon Rage, Hydro Pump, or Hyper Beam. It goes for Hydro Pump here, doing roughly 1/3 and then I knock it out. Both Dragonair and Dragonite have Psychic type moves, but they aren't damage dealing Psychic type moves, they are Agility or Barrier. That means they're just gonna spam these moves because Lance does have good AI. In this case, it's working against him. The worst possible things that could happen to Machamp here in red version is maybe the Gyarados critting with Hydro Pump or Hyper Beam, or the Aerodactyl using Supersonic, or potentially critting with Hyper Beam. That said, I can just mimic Agility, set up, and then one-shot the Aerodactyl, so it's never going to attack. So theoretically, only 2 Pokemon can attack Machamp. In reality, only 1 can. Well, I guess unless Rock Slide misses on the Aerodactyl. So with Lance defeated, look at the clock. Machamp in Pokemon Red has defeated all but 1 trainer in the same time it took Machamp in Yellow to get to Victory Road. And Yellow version Machamp doesn't necessarily have things easy during the Elite Four. Okay, Editor Scott here. I forgot to mention that I actually do some extra training in Victory Road with Yellow version Machamp. This is so that I can get to level 60 and then use 3 rare candies prior to Lorelei to make her a little bit easier and to line up all my experience for the remainder of the league. Notice against Lorelei, her Slowbro doesn't have just Amnesia. It also has Psychic. Not to mention, Lorelei's AI script is fundamentally weird in Pokemon Yellow. In Red version, if you bring, say, a Primeape into the fight against Lorelei, save in her chamber, and then use Rage on turn 1 against the Dugong is just going to spam Rest over and over again because it's a Psychic type move and she has good AI. But in Yellow version, they fixed this. On 2 out of 5 turns, her Dugong is going to see all of its moves as neutrally effective and randomize between them. This means Machamp can potentially get hit by Aurora Beam having its attack stat lowered, or Bubble Beam having its speed stat lowered, which would put it slower than Jinx later in the fight and expose it to Lovely Kiss. So I am using Submission to knock out the Dugong and the Cloyster as fast as possible. And then once I make it to the Slowbro, I have to deal with it using Psychic. On turn 1, there is a 50% chance that it will use this move, but on turn 2, it is always going to go for Amnesia. Essentially, I just have to get lucky here. Slowbro cannot use Psychic against Machamp. If it doesn't, then I can knock out the Jinx and use Submission to one-hit the Lapras, because in this case, there's no opportunity for Machamp to set up. It's just too dangerous to mimic Amnesia against the Slowbro. In this battle, I got very lucky, and I was able to beat Lorelei on my first attempt. Okay, this guy, we're not going to mention his name, but he is a lot better in Pokemon Yellow. His movesets have dramatically improved. Like, I mean dramatically improved. The Hitmonchan can actually freeze you with Ice Punch, but it can also thaw you when it uses Fire Punch. Also, the Onix have Dig and Earthquake, which they don't have in Pokemon Red, and the Machamp knows Submission, and it no longer knows Fissure, meaning it's not going to just spam useless moves, at least most of the time. Sometimes it uses Leer over and over again. Agatha is more difficult in Pokemon Yellow, for one reason. Her movesets are greatly improved. The final Gengar specifically knows Psychic now, which can do massive damage to Machamp. But I'm lucky I've leveled up a lot, plus I'm able to one-shot all of her Pokemon, so provided I get a little bit lucky here, Machamp is able to pull through, and that happens first attempt in this run. But then I have to take on Lance. And this is one of 2 battles that forced me to level up much more than I would have otherwise liked to with Machamp in this playthrough. Lance's Aerodactyl knows Wing Attack and Fly, 2 super effective moves against Machamp, and Lance's Dragonairs no longer have Agility, so there is no way for my Machamp to outspeed the Aerodactyl, unless the Gyarados just consistently goes for Leer badge boosting my speed enough, but that's going to be quite dangerous to luck into, so I want to knock out the Gyarados as soon as possible. Then I'm going to use Earthquake to knock out the Dragonair, and after that I will mimic Ice Beam to knock out the Dragonair, then I have to use Rock Slide to one-shot the Aerodactyl because Ice Beam doesn't do enough damage. If my health is low and Aerodactyl goes for Fly, then Machamp will lose. There's nothing I can do about it. That's what happens here, and I take my second reset of the playthrough. That said, things are fairly consistent against Lance. I can use Body Slam against the Gyarados. I don't have to use Rock Slide because I can 2-shot. Both of these moves will 2-hit. I make it to the Aerodactyl this time around with green health, and even if it goes for Fly, I should survive, provided it doesn't get a critical hit. But this time, it just goes for Wing Attack. The reason I mimicked Ice Beam is just so that I can one-shot the Dragonite at the end of the fight. I tried playing some iterations of this run without Mimic, but overall it just didn't do very well because Dragonite kept burning me with Fire Blast or just critting, things like that. In the end, I do think that Ice Beam is the more consistent strategy here, and it doesn't take too much time to get it. So with 1 loss to the Dragon-type specialist, Machamp in Yellow is now ready for the champion. But before that, let's finish off the game with Red version. For this fight, I have taught Rest. This is important for one reason. I'm going to knock out the Pidgeot and the Alakazam as soon as I can in this fight. Notably, the Psychic type is faster than Machamp, which means I'm exposed to 1 turn of damage. But there are multiple ways that Alakazam in Red version can win against this powerful Pokemon. It could use Psybeam, not doing enough damage, and Machamp will survive. It could go for Psychic and get a Gen 1 miss, although that is unlikely. I could also pull off a miracle, one-shot the Pidgeot with a critical hit Rock Slide, and then survive Alakazam's Psychic, because it does between 73 and 86% damage without a critical hit. Also, Alakazam could just choose Reflect, giving me another turn to attack it, or the potential for a knockout with a critical hit from Earthquake. This is, of course, a risky fight. But in this case, I make it through on my first attempt because he went for Psybeam. All of my planning up until this point has ensured that I level up going into the next Pokemon, the Rhydon, because my Machamp's at a fairly low level. But I don't want it to level up for the remainder of the fight, because I can use Rest here, stalling the Rhydon out, waiting for it to use Tail Whip or Leer, which is a 50% chance because it only has 4 moves. I'm doing this so that I can badge boost Machamp, and I'm going to set up a total of 4 times. Well, I intended for 4 times, but I end up getting 5. From there, there, I'm gonna one-shot the Rhydon, and then I have to two-shot the Exeggutor. This is the Pokemon that I wanted to set up for. It's so annoying because it has a Psychic type move, which is Hypnosis, and it's always going to choose this if you don't have a status condition. Luckily for me, this move is really inaccurate, and even if it does hit, Machamp still has time to wake up and knock out the Exeggutor with one more use of Body Slam. From there, I have retained my badge boosts, and I can one-shot both the Gyarados and the Charizard, clocking in with a final red version time of 35 minutes and 54 seconds, which by the way on stream was 35 minutes and 55 seconds. There is a small discrepancy here just because I had to refilm this run for the video. Machamp finished with 0 resets or blackouts at level 62 with a game time of 2 hours and 23 minutes. Okay, are you ready for the absolute existential horror that is the champion in Pokemon Yellow? I don't think you are. First of all, as we start this fight, look at my moveset. Fissure, Earthquake, Rock Slide, and Rest. I don't want to be using this moveset, but it is the best option that Machamp has available to it. I'm going to describe why. So, Sand Slash at the beginning of the fight can be awful, poisoning you with Poison Sting, critting you with Slash, doing massive damage with Earthquake, and wasting your time with Fury Swipes. After that, even though we have leveled up significantly more in Pokemon Yellow, Alakazam still outspeeds, and its moveset is so much better than it is in Red version, because instead of Reflect, which just gives you another turn to attack, it has Kinesis, which can lower your accuracy. Following the Alakazam is another Psychic type, the Exeggutor, and unlike in Red version where it has Barrage, Hypnosis, and Stomp, it has one more move, Leech Seed, which is so annoying. I hate this move, and it will use it after it puts you to sleep with Hypnosis. And there's no way to badge boost because Rhydon doesn't exist. And the champion in Yellow has no moves that you can mimic to set up. Well, except the final Flareon, which does have Reflect, and it is going to be locked into this move against Machamp, so I guess there's that silver lining. If we make it by Exeggutor, we have to go up against Magneton, which has Thunderbolt and Thunder Wave. Then we have Cloyster, which can freeze you with Ice Beam, clamp you for massive damage, lower your attack with Aurora Beam, and potentially combo Spike Cannon with the Magneton's Screech. Not to mention the fact that if the Exeggutor set up Leech Seed and then Cloyster goes for Clamp, you will both take Leech Seed damage and Clamp damage for every hit. Luckily, Spike Cannon doesn't work the same way. So why am I running Fissure here? Well, I have to two-shot the Sand Slash using Earthquake, and at level 66, this is not even a guarantee. Sometimes I will have resets against the very first Pokemon. Once it goes down, I have leveled just enough to sometimes survive the Alakazam's Psychic even when I'm on low health. In this first fight, it doesn't work out for me. In the next battle, I get poisoned by the Sand Slash, then the Alakazam hits Kinesis, it uses Psybeam after I miss, gets a critical hit, and Machamp faints. I tried again. This time I missed the Sand Slash because I'm using Fissure now, hoping for a faster fight. You don't have to do this. I end up resetting here quickly and trying again. And that's really what it comes down to. Fissure just has the ability to make this fight so much faster and to help you avoid so many of the nuisances. What I had found when testing this battle with Machamp is that if you ever get hit by Leech Seed on the Exeggutor, you essentially are never going to get a good time with Machamp because you bleed so much time trying to win using Rest. Like, I am not kidding, you will sometimes bleed multiple minutes of time just trying to make it by the Cloyster, and sometimes that will end in defeat. It can still crit you, it can still freeze you, there is so much that can go wrong. Since there's no way to set up, Body Slam or Rock Slide will never two-shot the Exeggutor, but there is an option for Machamp. Previous to this Fissure strategy, I was playing a lot of runs using Fire Blast. It can help against the Sand Slash to two-hit and potentially burn, and it can also help against the Exeggutor to two-shot. However, what I found running that strategy is that the fight still sometimes just devolves into a mess with Rest because you get hit by Hypnosis, then Leech Seed, and then Cloyster clamps you endlessly. And when Zealouspawn and I really sat down and discussed it, there is just so much upside to using Fissure. Number one, we can one-shot the Exeggutor and just delete it without it ever choosing Hypnosis or Leech Seed. If we have to reset, we reset very quickly because Fissure is just missing. Also, even if Exeggutor does hit Hypnosis and then go for Leech Seed, I can still just one-shot the Cloyster using Fissure later on. And if I make it to the Flareon, I'm going to win because it only has Reflect. Plus, I'm utilizing a moveset that has Earthquake, so Magneton isn't a threat. Really, Fissure solves the Exeggutor and the Cloyster in a really beautiful and perfect way. It slows the Sand Slash down slightly, not having access to Fire Blast and the upside from Burn, but overall, Fissure is just so much better here. If you one-shot the Exeggutor, you don't even need to Fissure the Cloyster. I can just knock it out slowly using Rock Slide. I will mention here that if I was able to use items in battle, Fissure would obviously be the choice for Machamp. We would have taught it as soon as we learned this move and then just spammed X accuracies throughout this entire section of the game, and it would have made all of this trivial. But because this format is no items in battle, Machamp ends up really suffering in yellow version. My best result playing with it after 5 playthroughs was 42 minutes and 51 seconds, with 5 resets at level 67, with a game time of 2 hours and 42 minutes. This result ends up being 6 minutes and 57 seconds slower than red version. And it's at this time that I will remind you that I only did 2 full playthroughs in red version, and I did 5 full playthroughs in Pokemon Yellow. Not to mention the fact that I have previously played Machamp in yellow version, so now my total run count in yellow version using it is around 9 or 10. Here, just before we place Machamp in my Pokemon Yellow tier list, I want to mention some community results which I think are relevant. Sauce Monkey was able to get a 39-minute time in Pokemon Yellow with Machamp, and this is definitely possible with the route that I showed you in this video. That said, I don't think this result is highly likely. He's getting better results than I am, he's probably playing slightly better, but overall I think that Machamp's results should kind of hover in this range, somewhere between 39 minutes and 44 minutes. It can get very unlucky late into the game, and the reality of the situation is that you do just need to get lucky against the champion. Now, I mentioned that I would talk about low kick later in the video, and I'm going to, just briefly. There is the potential to hold on to this move exclusively because it has a 30% chance to flinch the opponent. You could use that upside to get through some of these Pokemon with slightly more consistency. I personally prefer the submission strategy and just deleting the Pokemon that are scary earlier on, and then using Fissure to also one-shot later into the game. I think it has more potential for an extremely good time, even though it is overall a risky, inconsistent strategy. So people on my streams, they've been saying it is the year of the one-hit KO moves, and I really think that that is the case. This year, I have learned that these moves are really good. Even though they're inconsistent, they save a lot of time. You could waste 2 minutes trying to heal and scrape through a fight with rest, or you could just reset 1 or 2 times and then Fissure the Executor into oblivion. These are casual speedruns after all, so I'm going to go for the thing that I think is fastest. And in this case, Fissure is it. So, where has Machamp earned itself a placement in my Pokemon Yellow tier list? It has secured itself a placement in the middle of the A tier, just behind Vaporeon and just ahead of Nidoqueen, at least for now. Both of the Nidos are in the A tier, and they really deserve S tier placements. They're going to fare so much better with some modern knowledge. I'm going to come back and do them in the near future, as well as Nidorino, Nidorina, and both of the Nidorans. But before that, we are going to have to re-rank Alakazam in Pokemon Yellow. We're getting close to the finish line here. I have ranked 122 out of 151 Pokemon. Thank you so much if you have supported me over the previous half decade. It really means the world to me. Now, if you've made it this far, you're incredible. I'll see you in my next video.